Yeah, well, if you can't tell, Kate and I we're pretty good buddies, and we call each other to check up on advocacy and policy issues, and we'll end up talking for an hour about just random stuff like movies and
Pandemic purchases.
grievances and all kinds of things, yeah. I'm Ariel Condra. I'm the Senior Vice President for Government Relations at the National Cooperative Bank. We're a national lender. We make loans to all types of co-ops. Our bread and butter is housing co-ops in New York City and other places, but we do a lot of food co-op lending. Actually, my food co-op lenders would probably tell me not to say that. We make a loan just as much to food co-ops as we do housing co-ops. They're a priority for us. And I'm here because I worked at Kate's previous place, but I started working at NCB, and one of our challenges is making loans to startups and wanting to prioritize how we could get SBA guarantees to help with the startup loans. And so that's going to be a lot of what I talk about today, and it's an issue I've been working for over 10 years. We've made progress, not there yet, almost, but it's something that I want to share with all of you. And I'm excited about doing this because when you talk about loan guarantees to food co-ops outside of our little world, no one cares and no one understands anything you're talking about. So like at business, like at dinner parties and social events, people ask me what I do and their eyes glaze over. So this is my niche. You're my crew here that I can talk to about. So, and also on another note, I have to leave quickly to hit to the airport to catch my flight. So you'll see me checking my clock and my Uber, so I apologize for that, but go ahead.
Daughter soccer game. So.
Yeah.
I'm Kate Latour. I'm the Director of Government Relations for the National Cooperative Business Association. We are the apex association for all types of co-ops, so our membership spans from food co-ops, electric co-ops, ag, purchasing co-ops, so like Ace Hardware, everything in between. My job really centers on both protecting kind of the existing policy ecosystem that supports cooperatives and cooperative development, as well as kind of really centering co-ops as a proactive policy solution. So this slideshow has a mind of its own going on. So I'll take that as a cue to move on to the kind of overview of what we are hoping to chat with today. We'll have plenty of time for questions at the end, and I'm hoping we can just engage and make sure we're really answering questions that help you. But I like to start these just by asking for folks to raise their hand in a totally no pressure situation if you have contacted any of your elected officials from local, state, federal, anybody.
About co-ops? Or
About
just in
anything.
general? Oh.
Fantastic. Love it. This is perfect. I'm going to come back next year and it's going to be 100%. But really, I think the point of me asking that is advocacy is about building relationships. Our job is going up to the hill, having some of the technical details available, but co-ops tell their story, but this is true.
You're just going to have to let it.
Yeah.
You know, actually, it's funny because other sessions it's been doing that. There's
Okay.
something weird about the vibe in this whole building.
Okay,
I've been
go
in
ahead.
other sessions-
It's not just me.
No, I've been in another session and it did that, and somebody in that room said, oh, it was doing that in another session
Okay.
I was in earlier. So apparently it's
Okay.
some weird
Some witchy
spirit
thing
that
happening.
is
Cool.
here
Very
doing
good.
it.
So keep going.
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll start. We'll be here still. You all are the best at telling your story. I think from startup to doors opening, that process is so powerful, and legislators don't necessarily know about it and their staffs unless they are told about it. So if you walk away with one thing, I think building relationships and telling your story with your elected officials would be that. But
We both work for senators. We both, and that day, you know, some of that role means every day, all day, we meet with constituents who have needs and questions, and you will be shocked at how a meeting or a challenge or an issue you have, it goes a long way in those meetings.
Mm-hmm.
It could change. It could be a game changer. Now, sometimes it doesn't, and that's kind of how it is.
Mm-hmm.
But Kate and I can talk all day long, and they understand the issue and they hear it. But as soon as they hear from a constituent, it has a lot of chances of moving the needle. So.
So we thought we would give kind of an overview of what's happening now, where co-ops stand, and then where we see kind of opportunity going forward. Oh, that worked out really well that time. So I'm going to turn it over to RL to kind of give a little bit more detail on the kind of fundamental issue around accessing capital with the Small Business Administration.
So where are all of you in a capital stage with your co-op? Is your co-op already up and running, or are you expanding, or are you just completely startup stage and you're looking at, now you're trying to think about capital?
We're startup stage and we've done one capital. We had a site, when we announced our site, we did a capital campaign, and then subsequently that site didn't work out. So now we got about 40% of our goal in our first campaign.
Okay.
And we're a startup, and we're in lease negotiations right now, and we're looking to get as much of the funding. We're in a food desert community, so we're looking to get as much as we can through grants and donations, and are meeting with a lot of elected officials, and got ARPA funding, and trying to really work on that.
That's fantastic. Ooh.
So we're a startup that just got a state grant from WUDIC for roughly $50,000. So, and that has a lot to do with like figuring out where to find a property that is acceptable, and then getting it built out, essentially getting it planned. So.
You say you got state funding for WIC?
WUDIC is Wisconsin Economic Development
Oh,
Corporation.
I thought you were talking about.
I thought you
So
said WIC too.
Yeah, WUDIC.
How's that work?
Yeah, so, but that'll get us to a point where we can actually order equipment.
Mm-hmm.
And that, at least it should, so, which is 18 months out.
Yeah, and I would note two things on, and this will connect later on, I promise, but the two folks who lead the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation formerly worked for co-ops or co-op-centered organizations. So like they're people, you know, I think half of the job is really making more people like understand kind of the co-op gospel and like become advocates and proponents, so that whatever position they find themselves in, they can center those policy solutions as well. So I think that's one really easy example, and Wisconsin tends to have a lot of them, where they have co-op roots. You know, for example, Missy, the head of the corporation worked for Land O'Lakes, so like one of the biggest co-ops in the country. So I think that kind of, you know, she can see how the co-op solution will fit in other places. Back to 7A.
Sure.
I'm so sorry.
So this is an issue I'm about to talk about and give some background on. It affects all of you. It's affected in the past co-ops just like yours, and it's going to affect future ones. So this is something that is very frustrating for me. I've been working on this issue for over 10 years, and I like to joke. I've talked about my kids already, but like when I started working on this, I didn't have kids, and now she's 10 playing soccer with. But the Small Business Administration, when it was created in the early 60s, it came out with, it viewed food co-ops as buying clubs. And maybe they were back in the day, I don't know. But like they looked at a block getting together and forming a buying club, and did not have a business purpose overall. That attitude and that culture has continued 60 years later with that view. And it's been an experience trying to work on this specific issue. But I'm also very stubborn. I think Kate's very stubborn too about this.
He means that in the nicest way.
About this issue. Because one, it's good policy. It makes sense. It's the right thing to do. It creates jobs. It creates a grocery store. Have we learned already in the pandemic that grocery stores are kind of important? I think so. So it's been decades discussions with Kate's trade association, NCBA. It's been, my bank makes loans to co-ops, so it's a top issue for us. And there's actually a regulation that stated that food co-ops specifically are ineligible for SBA lending. We were able to change that 5 years ago. It was one of the last reg changes that the Obama administration recommended. Luckily, the Trump administration agreed with that and approved that regulation change. So technically, food co-ops and worker co-ops are eligible for SBA lending. And what does that mean? That means if you come to your local bank, or you come to us and everything's in order, in theory, we would go get an SBA guarantee that would guarantee 80% of your loan backed by SBA. If you were a pizza restaurant,
You're
or
saying NCG's offering? Be back by
National Cooperative Bank, NCB, we or your local bank would work with SBA and work with you to get a loan, and it would be guaranteed by SBA. 80%.
So if I could add just a little bit of context there, the purpose of the Small Business Administration is to kind of spur that small business development. And so they say, okay, you know, in the event that the loan would fail, we'll back up to 85% of that. And so that's where the loan guarantee comes into place, and in part, why, you know, just to have co-ops be part of that menu of small business options.
And once you start talking to your, I hate to spoiler alert, when you start talking to your lender, it is not fun because you're a startup. You're talking to a bank and if they make a loan, they expect to get their money back, and how can they get their money back if you don't have very much capital or collateral or resources? Anyway.
But I know.
Go ahead.
I'm just gonna go on to you and complain a little bit, but about lenders, whether they're banks or if they're CFIs, like if the SBA is gonna guarantee 85%, like they can take on the 15%. I mean, even if, let's just say that, you know, it goes bad and the loan, you know, the business doesn't work, like the banks and the foundations, the CDFIs, like they've got the 15%. Like they can take that risk. That's what I've been pushing back on people.
I used to think, I mean, that's a very rational, common sense thought. But I've been around lenders now where it's like they're not going to make a loan that they think is going to go bad or has a chance of going bad, even for that 15%. That's just not in their DNA. As a lender wakes up every day and thinks about making a loan to someone and getting paid back, and with interest. And my lenders, there's still lenders in my bank that have had bad loans like decades ago, where like people are still like, you know, that one loan went bad on him.
But they're a bank,
like,
and they're guaranteed by the FDIC and like CRA. Like,
what's 15% of $4 million? That's some change, even though it's. You make a great point. I'm just giving you the thought process, because I've thought about having this conversation too with people, because they're like, what's so? But to even get to that guarantee, the SBA requires a business to provide an owner of the business to provide a personal guarantee. So let's say you have 1,000 members. The SBA, in theory, expects one of the 1,000 people to sign away their house or collateral for a $2 million, or I'm just making the number up, $1 million loan. And then they'll say, well, why don't your general manager sign it? And they're like, well, that's actually the person who doesn't own the business.
Right.
So it's been a long, and so now there's an entity guarantee type of thing. But this is how we've been working on this issue for so long, and it's just like it's just back and forth. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, yes, so many. I think really too the history of it is important and interesting, because the U.S. Department of Agriculture lends to guarantees loans to co-ops seamlessly. It's in their DNA because they worked with agriculture cooperatives and electric cooperatives when private investors would not serve those communities. SBA has started as a mom and pop supporting sole proprietorships, which we have nothing against mom and pop shops. They're fantastic and serve their purpose in the economy as well, but they were designed specifically for that model, versus USDA really had it ingrained in its foundation and when it was authorized to support that business structure. And so I think even though USDA is older, it is difficult to change the DNA of an administration, and so that is what our 10-year journey is.
Sure. So we made progress. So now food co-ops are eligible. There's also an entity guarantee where we can talk about that later. But we've made a lot of progress, and the latest was the Build Back Better bill. I think everyone's heard of that. Kate and I were successful in getting a pilot program created in that bill for $100 million to make loans to food and worker co-ops without the co-op having to provide a personal or entity guarantee. So basically, essentially, it would
Those are loans or grants?
Loan guarantees.
Loan guarantees. So it would waive that requirement of a personal or entity guarantee.
Is
We-
there a stipulation in the bill about when that needs to be paid back, the terms of that?
No.
So it would be the standard, so it's part of their flagship program, which is called 7A. And so this basically created a set aside regulation for co-ops. So all of the other terms of the 7A program would apply.
Under SBA.
Yes,
Okay.
yep.
And unfortunately, as all of you have seen in the news, it did not pass by 2 Senate votes. And since then, we've been on hold to see what Congress will do next with Build Back Better. Essentially, we were told by members, by staff and people we've talked to that it's dead. It's not coming back. Okay? So there's a lot of other priorities in that bill where it's environmental
Can
and
you tell me the legislators that were kind of championing?
That we're championing the co-op provision.
Yeah.
Senator Cardin of Maryland, Senator Schumer of New York, and then on the House side, Congresswoman Velasquez. Those were our champions, and those are 3 really good ones to have your back. And so.
For example, just because I really want to stress how important it is to familiarize your elected officials with co-ops, Senator Schumer, who is now the majority leader in the Senate, lives in a housing co-op. He has lived in a housing co-op for 30 plus years. It was like very cheap all that time ago, and that's really his family's only source of income, wealth building. Not to say that he's not independently got finances going on, but and Nydia Velasquez similarly has had worker co-ops around her, food co-ops around her that she sees how integral they are to the district that she serves in New York. Mm-hmm.
And she is currently the chairwoman of the House Small Business Committee. Excuse me. And she's been stated publicly that she will not rest until co-ops are able to gain access to the Small Business Administration. Unfortunately, we're now in midterm season, so nothing's moving, and no one's working together, and no one's doing any kind of type of congressional business because they all want to see what's going to happen after November. So we're kind of in a gray area right now. But that is the latest update on SBA lending. Now, and we'll tie this back to what Kate is going to be promoting throughout this hour, is that it's very important if you really, the SBA guarantee is probably going to be a lot of your lifeline to create your co-op. And it's very important for you to reach out to your members and talk to them about it and see how they can be helpful to this, because it is, not only going to be helping yourself, but you're going to be helping future co-ops trying to gain access to this money. We're so close to it that, and it's interesting to try to talk to them about your challenges, the capital challenges, and how many jobs you're going to be creating, and what your co-op's going to serve the community, how it's going to serve the community, and what great things it's going to do.
On both ends, right? Like providing that food access is so critical, but food co-ops typically provide around 20% of locally sourced food versus grocery stores, I think, are at 2.5%. So they have an incentive that you're getting it from local farmers, local creators, local producers, and selling that in the community and creating that kind of circular economy that they want to see as well. Go ahead.
My rep is Congressman Yarmouth, who's the House Budget Chair.
Mhm.
He's retiring, so I know his predecessor probably is going to be. But would love to have an opportunity to connect him to Velasquez or whatever.
Have I got some ideas
To
for
see
you?
if he can do so. We've been trying to push him on supporting retiring coal power plants for the rural co-ops,
Mhm.
which too was a part of the Build Back Better that didn't pass. So he's been primed a little bit. We also asked him for a direct allocation. I don't know if we made his list or not, but he's somewhat familiar, in a pretty proper position right now until November. So we'd love just to make the connection.
Definitely, absolutely, yes. We'll follow up after.
And if you reach out and coordinate with Kate, she will help you with that.
Yep, absolutely. I think I might give up on this. I think I'm gonna skip. I'll come back to these points if there's time, but I want to skip ahead to the Capital for Cooperatives Act, because I think Ariel mentioned that the elections are coming up, which necessarily means less legislation is happening. Nevertheless, we are pushing this in as many moving vehicles that exist. So we had the provision in the Build Back Better Act that was the moving vehicle at the time. as part of that, we also helped to introduce the Capital for Cooperatives Act. That is legislation that would require the SBA to change their regulations. And those new regulations cannot include these barriers for co-ops that we've talked about. So that was introduced by Senator Hickenlooper from Colorado.
Who's on the Senate Small Business Committee.
Yep. And now there's a companion legislation in the House by Congressman Joe Neguse, also from Colorado, and also on the Small Business Committee. And most recently, in the Senate, Senator John Tester from Montana co-sponsored the bill. So it's kind of those drips of building progress, building co-sponsors. So this worked out well. Please ask your member of Congress to co-sponsor the Capital for Cooperatives Act. But really, it's an opportunity to introduce your business, where you are in the process, and end it with an ask. And that's a very tangible way that they can support your business. And frankly, their number one goal is to be reelected. So this is the way they can start building support in the community, and again, have that kind of feedback loop. So removing that legislation, I will put an asterisk on kind of the most boring piece, but our conversations continue with the Small Business Administration. This is something that they have the authority to change themselves, so we continue to ask them to use that authority as well. That unfortunately is just not as fun of a engaging
Government
process.
is slow, and it really is.
It really is. So that's, I think, Capital for Cooperatives and kind of the access to capital. Yeah, let me pause.
Is the main desired outcome for getting loans available through SBA guarantees is to create a mechanism for those local community banks to be able to offer loans? I mean, is that kind of
That's
end
also
goal?
the thing, is like, we're kind of the only game in town for lending, and we want this opened up for everyone and to grow the sector. Like this, to me, is like, if we can get this fixed, it's gonna take the lid off the food co-op sector, and the worker co-op sector is just gonna grow like gangbusters.
So it's a different underwriting criteria for co-op loans that it's, I think, an ecosystem kind of building exercise, and NCB obviously has that ecosystem mastered. Because it's not plugged in fully at the Small Business Administration, community banks, even some credit unions, which are co-ops, don't have that portfolio. Big
Or
banks,
understanding
right.
of a co-op structure. So
Right.
it would open up to if you want to work with your local community bank or credit union, it would open that up where they're like, I'm not sure about what you're talking about, but I do understand the SBA guarantee because they use it all the time.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to pause for other questions on capital issues. Yeah.
So I was just trying to understand, I thought the regs passed like 5 years ago to make this, available to co-ops, but now we're having to do more to make, because I guess the SBA never really did anything to make it happen.
It's complicated because there's two pieces. In the beginning, it was co-ops are ineligible, and also if they were eligible, they have to they have to meet the guarantee requirements. We got that fixed, so now SBA will say, well, you're eligible now, apply, but we need a personal guarantee.
Oh, okay.
And then you're like, well, that doesn't work for me, and they go,
Yeah.
well, that's our requirement, so.
Okay, so it's a personal guarantee that we're.
Yeah.
And then in the year after that, there was legislation passed that asked SBA to look at and recommend alternatives. And they said, we've looked at alternatives and we are recommending the personal guarantee. And so it's that same kind of like,
Okay.
And their argument is, everyone else does it, why can't you guys? And we're like, we're not structured that way.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, we're a government agency and we're not capable of thinking that outside the box. Or we don't want to.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I maybe got in trouble a little bit at one conference when I said they're at one point their reasoning is, this is how we've always done it.
Mhm.
And I said, is that how we should continue to do it? I thought that was a perfectly logical
Yes.
question to ask, but it didn't go over quite well. So, finding that fine message to engage. And it's just kind of finding those avenues and continuing to push whenever we can. Go ahead.
What has been your work to push USDA in different kind of ways to kind of maybe supplement what SBA can't do? I feel like USDA's a lot more flexible, but I guess, in addition to the USDA, like how is this filtering down to the ag departments? Because our state ag department is somewhat rigid to be open to working with anybody who's not a producer, even if you're working to work with producers. Like they just want the money to go directly to producers and don't really understand they kind of understand the value added, but like they want that to be like the farmer's wife to do the value added, not the folks in the city to do the value added.
Sure.
So have you had any experience working with USDA and particularly state ag departments to kind of filter some of this down and fill in the gaps where SBA can't? Or,
So, yeah, and of course, USDA is limited in where they can provide those funds based on geography and population size. Do you want to talk about the interagency working group?
Well, I want to touch base on this. If USDA, their lending programs were not limited to the population, it has to be 50,000 people or less. If it was above 50,000, we wouldn't even be here today. Like you guys would just go to USDA and get the loan. They're very friendly to co-ops. They're very friendly to what we're working with them. And the only setback is it's got to be a community over 50,000 or less through their business and industry loan program. Now, there's an asterisk there. I'm paraphrasing here. I'm not exact on this, but if your co-op sources their products, their inventory and producers and things like that in rural areas, you could technically be qualified for a USDA business and industry loan, even if you're in an urban area. That would revolve. If you're kind of in that world where you're thinking that might be an option,
we certainly are.
it would be worth reaching out to your USDA state office
The state office.
and asking them specifically about that business and industry program.
Thank you.
They don't. It's just such a little niche for them. It's hard for them to publicize it, and we all catch it. But that's a great point. But like USDA, our lives would change if USDA could make urban loans.
Yeah, I think two vehicles, just to add on that a little bit, there is, RL drafted the language and helped to establish what's called the Interagency Working Group on Cooperative Development, which basically charges the U.S. Department of Agriculture with helping other federal agencies understand the cooperative model, how it could help serve their needs. So, for example, the last meeting they hosted talked about food supply chain and caregiving. So folks from the Health and Human Services Department and the Veterans Administration were there to see, okay, how can we plug in this model with our work? And so that vehicle is fantastic because it brings more people to the table, but is more on, I would say, like a voluntary basis. So we send the invitation far and wide and hope people come in, and then we can follow up and build those relationships. The second thing I would point out is that, all of this progress, I think it gets deflating sometimes, frankly, when it's like, we've been doing this for so long and it's not changing. Things have changed, and I think the best way to understand that is that co-ops were eligible for those disaster assistance programs, the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. They would not be if it weren't for all this work leading up to this point. Yeah. There was a congressional hearing a week before kind of all those cities shut down, 2+ years ago now, that examined this issue. Now, it was totally separate. We didn't really know what the pandemic was at that point. But then the next week, they were saying, okay, how are we going to help small businesses? Let's not forget about co-ops. And so, that timing, for as awful as everything has been, building that relationship up was so helpful in that when kind of the crisis point reached, we weren't an afterthought. And I think it is a really important outcome. And we know between those two programs, over $1 billion have reached co-ops. That's co-op jobs, co-op communities. That has those radiating effects. The thing that I would also point out is that it is beneficial to say how your co-op has used those dollars. For example, Willie Street Food Co-op did a program to make sure that seniors and people with compromised immune systems could more readily and safely get their food delivered. They partnered with Union Cab Cooperative. Like those, I think they doubled down their efforts on local sourcing. Being able to get that message out there, I think one of the biggest detriments to cooperators is humility, frankly. Everyone else is boasting about what they're doing, and I think we need to be telling our story and all the good work that is happening to really say this is the good local investment that we're looking for, and these people are doing the work. That's my soapbox. I'm sorry, I get really excited about that. But truly, like, there's such fantastic work. Every time I send a story to a staffer or a member of Congress, they're excited by it. And I'm like, me too. And, we just need to be telling our own
Do
story.
you remember off the top of your head the loan amounts for the PPP loans for co-ops through the disaster? Like it was
The total,
like the total and how many and things like that.
I think it was about 6,500 co-ops. And then between the two programs, over 1.2 billion in loans. Either Paycheck Protection had the forgiveness component, so it basically became a grant, and then EIDL with the really affordable loan. So $1.2 billion of capital that wouldn't have otherwise reached there.
And so we went to Congress, the small business committees, and to our allies and say, they did this, but they can't get a loan through the SBA.
Yeah.
It's crazy. There's such a need out there. So
the other kind of just in terms of ecosystem building kind of aspect that I would note is the technical assistance component, in part. Food Co-op Initiative and ICDC is putting on this conference through that support and making sure that there is an ecosystem of technical assistance. That, again, is only available directly to rural communities. Obviously, there are ways to make it reach a little bit wider, but similarly, because there is not a loan component or a loan guarantee component at the Small Business Administration, there's 1,000 technical assistance organizations financed by the SBA in local communities that don't have co-ops on their menu. So part of that education is also with the business leaders in your community, the small business development centers, and ensuring that, I think I know of 6 small business development centers that have kind of co-op expertise. That number is growing, but that's obviously not enough out of 1,000 for people to have the kind of expertise either to directly support a cooperative that wants to start up, or even to know where to go if someone says I want to start a co-op. So I think that technical assistance piece is just as important, and all of these kind of actions and ways to improve the environment for co-ops is through talking to your member of Congress.
So I'll throw 2 things out. This is obviously not a meet your lender panel, but if you, from my experience with coming to this conference and talking to startups, you're so focused on membership, finding a place, all the stuff that needs to be done. Like, don't wait to the very end when you have everything in order to go. Well, let's talk to a bank now. Mm-hmm. Like, please talk to your bank, your local bank, NCB, others, of like, just start a relationship of like, here's where we are, here's where we're trying to go, and then they'll give you feedback. They'll talk to you about like some of the challenges, because the last thing you want to do is you think you're all the way up to the end and then go, well, let's talk to the bank, and it's, it's not going, it may not be an easy conversation. So there's my meet the lenders panel advice. And second, I know we're going to be moving on to other topics. What we just laid out, especially the SBA stuff, is complicated and kind of confusing. Does anyone have any questions or any clarification on that, and to have a better understanding?
Yeah, it just depends more at the state level with representatives, senators. Like, it sounds like you're kind of talking bigger and federal, and I'm kind of curious what kinds of steps we can take at those levels and how much they talk to like people at the federal level. I'm running for assembly, so I'm kind of curious,
Awesome.
like how those relationships work in terms of just getting communication happening.
That's a great question. You're looking at me, aren't you?
Well,
Or do you have any thoughts?
it's so federalism, man. It's so dependent on state. It depends on the legislator. There's I think you'll probably be a fantastic member of the legislature, but it ranges so widely on what people are there for, I would say. And so it really there's no singular answer, unfortunately. There are, I would note, for example, block grants of funds that go to states. For example, the Community Development Block Grant is administered by Housing and Urban Development, but gives this huge swath of activity available to states and cities around directly housing issues or kind of small business development, weatherization activities, things like that. So I think my point in saying that is be creative. That, you know, if there's not a great relationship from local to state or state to federal, then there might be another one. That I think building those relationships in different state agencies and state directors, frankly, like RL mentioned, the USDA state directors, hugely important positions, because for many of the agencies, your grant applications, for example, would either go through a state office or for some it's a regional office. And so that connection can often be more beneficial than anything from a federal agency. I don't know if I kind of skirted your issue. I hope it kind
It's
of.
a federal issue, but like, it doesn't hurt for assembly person to reach out to the member of Congress and be like, this is what we're seeing down here.
Especially with earmarks back, they're called something else now, but they're earmarks. I think you mentioned them earlier, yeah. And you know, there's a whole litany of companies and nonprofits that have gotten, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars through these earmarks process. That some of the time, you know, I think, you know, another plug for building relationships with staffers, if they understand, you know, your job is to explain the problem. Our job and staffers' job is to find the solution. And so if a staffer hears your problem and says, okay, they need a grant to do X, Y, Z, they can find, you know, they can work to try to find where that solution might come from. So hopefully that kind of also demystifies things, that like we're not here to make everyone policy experts and whatever, but just that the work has such a connection to advocacy.
I think there's a deeper appreciation for grocery now after this pandemic, and also I think food deserts. I mean, people are starting to understand that there are grocery challenges in some of these communities. I think, and use that.
And is that SBA technical assistance, is that usually like grants, free classes? I mean, how does that usually like play out?
Similarly, so basically there is a pot of money for these 1,000 centers, and each center does something a little bit differently. For example, I know there's one house in the University of Wisconsin that supports the Madison community, and they work with the Center for Co-ops that's in the school as well. But that looks a little bit different wherever it is. So some offer, you know, webinars and programs to help succession planning, for example, which is an enormous issue. Some on access to capital and where to find it within SBA and outside of SBA. And then some is kind of the meat and potatoes of business development, helping a feasibility study and all that goes into starting a business. And so it ranges pretty widely based on where the community is.
Just to add on to that, we've used our local one in San Diego. It's at a community college, and even though they didn't know about co-ops, they still offer a lot of services like marketing,
Oh, fantastic.
you know, support, feasibility studies, site selection, things like that could potentially help you.
And those are, if I'm not mistaken, all subsidized services. There's
Yeah,
not
it's
usually
free.
a fee
Yeah.
to it. So that's always beneficial to know. And I thought you had a question back there.
I wanted to know more about the Capital for Cooperative Act.
Sure.
Just kind of unpack that a little bit.
Yep, so it's a pretty straightforward bill, which was the point. We wanted it to be able to be discussed pretty easily. The bill would, if passed and signed into law, would require the Small Business Administration to change their requirements for loan guarantees to no longer include those persons, so no single person for co-ops would have to put their house on the line, or the entity guarantee that RL mentioned, so that, you know, for example, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, and there's other ways to secure a loan. I think what kind of sometimes gets lost, we're not advocating for kind of risky loans to be made to co-ops. To RL's point, you know, there's still underwriting criteria that need to be met. This is saying there's many ways to secure a loan, and the one way you're offering is not the only way. And so it would require the Small Business Administration to come up with regulations that allow co-ops to participate in those financing programs.
And you said it's passed already, or?
Sadly, no. It's the Capital for Cooperatives Act that's been introduced in both the House and the Senate. So right now we're building co-sponsors. So if you reach out to your member of Congress, ask them to co-sponsor that bill. I would be happy to help find that information.
She can email you the bill draft. She can email you who
Please.
sponsored it.
I'm in Brooklyn, New York, and I'm an unpaid elected official. I do this state party, and I know all of our.
Got it.
I knew Schumer and everybody.
Perfect.
I just gotta get it and give me the information.
Yeah, that's really helpful, and I think you might have come in at a different time that Senator Schumer and Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez are enormous champions of this issue.
Okay.
Yes, so they're terrific, but always good to hear from constituents, right? Like, they know us, and we email them regularly, and they're probably
I
like,
don't think we know locally.
Yep.
That's the problem I'm having.
but do you know what, I think a really cool thing to add
We
on?
really don't know about what they're advocating for, and
Yep.
how could we support.
Yes.
So thank you for telling me, but I didn't know.
So advocacy, I also think, can look a lot of different ways. Writing to your member of Congress and calling them is kind of the 101. This is, First Amendment stuff. But also bring them to your community. Bring them to a co-op that's already started. Bring them to an organizing meeting if you're in the startup stage. Invite them to that conversation so they can hear firsthand what you're trying to do and what are the barriers you're facing. They want to be there, right? They more than they want to hear from us. They want to be in the community too. So I think that's a really good.
You came in a little later after we talked about this, but we'll pig you for it, like you're gonna get in trouble for being
No.
late to our panel. But Velázquez and Schumer have just been the biggest champions. In fact, after the unfortunate the Buffalo shooting, the first thing I got was an email from Senator Schumer's office of like, how can food co-ops help this area, and how can we help to connect the dots with food co-ops and what the community's going through. And then Congresswoman Velázquez has had 2 hearings on this one issue already, and she and Schumer and Senator Cardin included a pilot program that failed in the Build Back Better. But like, it would be great for you to reach out to them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Other questions?
I do wanna see the slide you had up with Twin Pines.
Yes.
I started taking notes and then everything went.
Yeah, okay, let me see if I can get this back up here. This is my baby. So if I wasn't on my soapbox before, I'm hiking up there now. This is, come on. Okay. The Twin Pines Voter Project. We launched in partnership with the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association and their Co-ops Vote program. This is nonpartisan, not political activity. This is simply to help register voters in your community. There's more aspects to it, but I think at its core, why I really wanted to bring this up in this group is that, you're doing the organizing now. You're building your membership. What if you add to that, after all informing them about the co-op, also I just wanted to check in, are you registered to vote? Do you need more information? You can just go to vote.coop and you can check your registration. You can see when your elections are, all of that really tailored information. And so we've created kind of a way for folks to get involved, whether you're a member of NCBA or not, that encourages folks to take any range of activities. Really, we have suggestions of how to get started, including, on your social media using the hashtag #CoopsVote, or in your newsletter linking to vote.coop. We have a QR code that I can share. But there's so many different ways to get involved, and I think just getting started, there's great, I should have brought a statistic, but a good number of people don't register to vote and don't vote because they're not asked to. And so part of it, if I'm being philosophical, the 5th cooperative principle is education, outreach, and training. And part of that in the 120-page guidance notes, if you're feeling like an endeavor, is around engaging with policymakers and candidates for that matter, and helping them understand the contributions that co-ops make to your community. So this is our starting at our website, which I should have put up there, ncbaclusa.coop/vote. There's more ways to get started. Otherwise, find me and I can get you that information. But leading up to hosting a voter registration drive as part of your community engagement, there's really no limit. But we wanted to, I think, particularly, frankly, with some of the disenfranchisement that's happening in different communities, otherwise uphill battles that are being created to vote. This is co-op's bread and butter. This is kind of democratic governance, democratic principles are in our DNA. And so this is, my hope is celebrating the co-ops that are doing this good work. I know, Union Cab in Madison has driven folks to the polls for free for I think like 20 years, you know, so we want to celebrate that, and we want to show how co-ops are really stepping up to the occasion and helping their communities.
Do you have any money for a ground game?
Can you say that again?
Do you have any money for a ground game in this?
So unfortunately, right now, this is a voluntary effort. So we're hoping that, you know, as folks, like I said, because it is part of the kind of culture and DNA of co-ops, that it integrates nicely. But we do have resources available on our website that are available to be used to hopefully, you know, make it easier. Other questions? Yeah.
So, I've been talking to our California startup co-op, food co-ops about like banding together, because I just feel like, and our mayor actually suggested this too, like, well, we're gonna have more power and a larger voice if we, you know, go to like our congressional, you know, people in California and our senators, and talk about co-ops as sort of a coalition, food
Yep.
co-ops. And so I was just wondering if you have any advice for us in terms of like starting to form that effort, or if there are any, you know, resources that you can point us to that maybe, you know, could help us in that area.
Yeah, I think we definitely have some startup information that we would be happy to share. I think advocacy is a balance of sharing data and stories. So for example, I mentioned before, food co-ops typically source 20% of their products locally. That's a great statistic, and there's tons other. They create more jobs than traditional grocery store. So we have that. So please find me and let me share that with you. I think that's a really good way to do it. Followed by, you know, the why you're doing it, and why co-ops are the solution for your community is a really good kind of 1-2 punch there. In terms of kind of starting the organization, I'm kind of a tried and true, you know, engage on social media, send out an email and see what sticks. Doodle polls tend to be my friend, but there's no, you know, unfortunately, I think, I guess I would say even small numbers can be mighty. That if it starts with 2 food co-ops, then you can start and say, hey, now we're bringing on this 3rd one, we're bringing on the 4th, and building momentum that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And I follow NCBA CLUSA, you know, with the newsletters and stuff, and I remember seeing something about a cooperative, like, congressional caucus. Is that still active, and is that?
Yes.
Should we be telling our representatives about that and
Yes.
asking them to be members? And
Yep, so
Okay.
because there are
What's the
4,
name of it again?
the Co-op Business Caucus.
co-op business caucus.
Yep,
Okay.
so because there are 435 members in the U.S. House of Representatives, it's not always easy for members to kind of stake their claim and show their support in different ways. So we helped to establish the Cooperative Business Caucus several years ago now. And basically, I think it serves 2 purposes. The first is to have an ask for your member of Congress to join the caucus. Very simple. This caucus exists. I want you to join it. This is why. This is my co-op contribution. Go ahead.
Are there any legislators of color on this co-op business caucus?
Yes. I don't have them off the top of my head.
That's okay.
Yeah, there's a handful.
This makes me feel good.
Yes, absolutely. No, and I think, you know, it's bipartisan, and everyone comes to co-ops for a different reason. So the kind of second part of that purpose of that caucus, one is to have someone on record saying they support co-ops. They joined the caucus. The second is we help to kind of facilitate quarterly, you know, every 3rd of the year, briefings on Congress. The staff turns over. That's just the nature of the staff there. And so we have kind of 101 education efforts. 2 members of Congress, usually we bring in a different co-op, or we bring in a different angle. So we've done kind of caregiving co-ops, or co-ops in financial services we've done before. So finding that different touch point because again, you don't know what staffer might be really drawn to the solution that you're putting up, and centering co-ops in that space. And then once, you know, hopefully we can build them in one sector of co-ops that expands to the model at large. So that's kind of the goal of the caucus. But yes, would love for folks to ask their members to join the caucus. There is more information on our website as well, which I bet I didn't put on there. It's ncba.coop though.
I would encourage you all to sign up for the email alerts from Kate's organization, because that's the call to action legislatively and updates on the progress of legislation and Congress and things like that on these lending issues. And then I'm sorry, I apologize, I have to leave to go to the airport. But if you want me to introduce you to one of our lenders and talk to about some lending issues, please shoot me an email. And it was just great to hear from all of you. Great questions, and we will not give up, 'cause we really care about this issue, and it's the right thing to do. So hang in there, and good luck. Thank you. Thanks, CK.
Good luck on the soccer.
I know, 6:30 game.
So I can stick around. If you have other questions, I'm happy to answer them. But if you want time to go for coffee too, that's fine too.
Kate, do you have like a national conference in DC?
We sure do. Yes, the Co-op Impact Conference.
Such a leading question.
Yes, no, yes, I know. My boss would appreciate you. Yes, the Co-op Impact Conference is fantastic, and it is the first Thursday, Friday, Saturday of October, which is Co-op month. So this year I'm actually really, really excited. We're hoping to have kind of a full-on hike the hill component, and having someone help us schedule those meetings, have kind of a home base on Capitol Hill, so that, you know, we're going to give folks kind of a 1, 2, 3 list of the co-op priorities. You'll go in and meet with your legislators and say, you know, here's our story, here's what the co-op community needs. And we would have, you know, a training session before that, and also it wouldn't be scary. But yeah, thank you so much for asking that. I should also, I think this is maybe my own self-consciousness coming out, but in an effort to kind of like demystify advocacy and talking with your legislators, I started working on the Hill. I worked in the Hill for 5 years in the Senate. I started when I was 22. I didn't know anything. And so I share that because you are the experts. Your story is what matters. And to not be intimidated by the staffers. You know, they have badges, but that's about it. That you should really, really feel comfortable either in Washington, D.C. or in your local offices. Those folks are always eager to engage with folks in the community. That I just want to kind of bring down barriers and demystify that process a little bit. Yeah.
Sorry, kind of chatty this morning.
That's okay.
But I'd like to know more about how the National Cooperative Association functions on the state level.
Sure. So unfortunately, it's pretty limited. So we focused our efforts at the federal level. We rely really heavily on our partners, co-op development centers, state associations, to tell us what they need at the local and state level. So we help, you know, for example, New Hampshire recently had legislation that was pending that would have been really problematic for resident-owned communities, which are those manufactured housing parks where the people who live there buy the land and own the land as a co-op.
Yeah.
And they had legislation that would have made it incredibly difficult for that option, and it would have leaned much more heavily towards like private equity. And so that we followed the lead of the local resident-owned community chapter and came in with a letter of support and asked how else we could be helpful. They used some of our data in their testimony. So I think in part because of the nature of co-ops and their kind of grassroots momentum, the state level we just don't have the bandwidth quite yet. But you know, obviously are hoping to build that.
How do urban co-ops get along with agricultural co-ops?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Yeah,
I feel like there's tension there.
We're trying to organize a black co-op, and well, we are, we're partnering with folks who are organizing a black farmer co-op in Kentucky, so.
That's
We're
awesome.
trying to be very intentional about working with farmer co-ops.
Are you working by chance with the Federation of Southern Co-ops?
Yes, we've
Good.
tapped the federation
Good.
to kind of be our lead organizer for.
Perfect. That's fantastic to hear. Again, I think it just depends, right? I think, for example, in Wisconsin, I know the farmer co-ops, electric co-ops, credit unions, worker co-ops, they get along. They have organizations to coalesce around and share best practices and all of the things. But that's not the same at every state. Wisconsin happens to have a really rich history in agriculture that I think has helped foster that. But I don't know, here's the thing, I think, like I said, people come to co-ops for different reasons, but I think when you're looking at the business model itself, that's the thing that brings people together. And it's that one member, one vote, people-powered solution that I think regardless of other things, people can get behind. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I'm from the data center in California. And I'm new there, so I'm looking at it with new eyes.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely feel a tension between the power of the agricultural cooperative,
Mm-hmm.
which is an institution in this country,
Mm-hmm.
versus urban cooperatives. Like
So-
the ags have the money and the power, and
Yeah.
urban co-ops have very little say about anything.
Yeah, California is really interesting for a number of reasons. One, their co-ops are big co-ops
Yeah.
in agriculture. Second, unlike basically any other pretty big state, they only have one electric co-op, which is just an interesting factor because those usually go hand in hand. I would go back to my comments earlier about ecosystem building.
Okay.
Agriculture cooperatives have been at the table for 100 years. Worker co-ops, food co-ops have not been.
Right.
And so I think, frankly, building that coalition with the agriculture cooperatives is a great way to pull that seat to the table.
Yeah, borrow influence, as they say.
What's that?
Borrow influence.
Exactly. I mean, but for legislation, I look for coattails all the time. I mean, like the Build Back Better Act was this enormous thing, and we got co-ops as part of that, right? Like we weren't going to get a standalone piece of legislation on co-ops in this moment, and so finding where the motion is and making your case in that space, I think, has a lot of value.
Well, Kate, I really appreciate you saying that. I mean, I think agriculture co-ops need like justice, racial justice,
Mhm.
wake-up call
Yeah.
in terms of what they and how they supported white supremacy in this country. So I would applaud you to just keep repeating that.
Yeah, frankly, I think co-ops are guided by their principles, which are fantastic and make them stand apart from different businesses, but DEI is not expressly included. Justice is not expressly included. It takes intentional effort just like it does in any other business. For the kind of, again, co-op philosophy, those 7 co-op principles, there's a movement now to establish an 8th principle around diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. And that has to be a global effort, right? So even then it's taking it up one more level and working for the International Cooperative Alliance through their processes. But no, I think, we can't rest on our laurels. I think co-ops are so special, but not because, it's because we make them work, right? It's because of the work that goes into it, and I think that work still needs to be intentional.
Yeah, you can say that looking into that camera right there.
Well, it sounds like this will be recorded, shared online. This is also something NCPA CUSA advocates for regularly. No, I am, and has been part of our impact conversations, frankly. And it's not always comfortable, but I think, that's where we make progress.
Correct.
So, that's my 2 cents there.
So you have legislative documents and things like that you can email, but just like.
Totally.
Okay.
Yes, and I have cards that I can pull out, and I'll send kind of the quick and dirty for the Caucus, for the Cooperatives Act, for Co-ops Vote. If you want to add your organization as a supporter of the Cooperatives Act, we have over 300 currently, but we're still building that list out because then we go to offices and say, there's 10 businesses in your district or whatever that support this, and you should too. So all those kind of little efforts.
And we can go to your website and find that and add our name, is that?
Yep, absolutely. I should have, maybe I can just do this. I wonder. I'll go like this. NCBA.coop is our website. Oh, I suppose I can't edit it then. So, yeah, so here's our website.
You wanna write it on the post-it board behind you? I have a marker.
Oh, I would love that. Thank you.
I knew it would come in handy.
That absolutely does. And then I'm gonna do /vote, /, oops, NCBA, clusa.coop. We went through a name change 60 years ago and kept the longer acronyms. So /vote and then /the capital for Cooperatives Act. Otherwise, if you click on our advocacy page, you can find basically all of it, as well as my email and phone number plastered everywhere. Please call, text, email, whatever works for you. Sorry for the tech issues.
It's the ghost, it's okay.
It is, yeah, the ghost has a mind of its own today. Perfect timing, too. Other last questions? Otherwise, I'd love to give you guys some time and I can grab my cards. Yeah. Oh, just stretching. Okay, good. No worries. No, that sounds great. Well, thank you guys so much for attending. I really appreciate the interest in advocacy and hope you're encouraged to take a couple action items after this. Thanks.
Thank you.